A hidden panel, a 90% rent hike, and a secret controlling stake in a property empire. Until the tenant discovers the real landlord is waiting right beneath him. The envelope was thick, an off-white monstrosity that felt heavy with implied threat. It sat on my worn oak coffee table, a declaration of war against my carefully cultivated peace. I picked it up, the crisp linen paper a stark contrast to the peeling laminate of the table. Inside, the letterhead screamed the name of Sterling Properties, the management company currently bleeding my bank account dry. My name is Arthur Finch, and I live in apartment 4B of the Hawthorne Heights complex. For the last 7 years, this sprawling, slightly shabby collection of brick buildings has been my sanctuary. It's got character, the kind you can't manufacture with sterile, modern gray paint. It has high ceilings, slightly crooked window frames that let in the sounds of the city like a low, comforting hum, and the lingering scent of old wood and successful solitude. I'd seen the signs, of course, the sudden, aggressive focus on necessary renovations that mostly involved painting over the beautiful original crown molding. The overly cheerful inspections led by Mr. Gerald Sterling himself, a man whose smile never quite reached his cold, lizard-like eyes. He was the face of the operation, the smiling executioner. I unfolded the letter. The opening pleasantries were sickeningly saccharine. Dear valued resident, we trust this correspondence finds you well and enjoying your tenure at Hawthorne Heights. Then came the punch. My current rent, $1,850, was being adjusted. The new rate, effective in 60 days, would be $3,500, more than a 90% increase. I read the number again, $3,500, for a 2-bedroom apartment that honestly needed a new boiler. I chuckled, a dry, rasping sound that startled my aging tabby cat, Chairman Meow, who immediately leaped from the armchair and glared at me with profound disapproval. Don't worry, Chairman, I muttered, smoothing the letter flat. It seems Mr. Sterling has decided to play a game. A game he was destined to lose. Gerald Sterling clearly believed I was just another renter, another soft target. He probably thought I was some starry-eyed artist or a struggling young professional drowning in student debt. He saw my quiet demeanor, my sensible hand-me-down furniture, and my preference for reading physical books over staring at glowing rectangles, and he made an assumption. He assumed I was weak. He assumed I couldn't afford it. He assumed wrong. So spectacularly wrong, in fact, that the correction I was about to implement would likely result in the immediate collapse of his little property empire. I walked over to the bookshelf that dominated my living room wall. It wasn't just shelves, it was a facade. I ran my fingers along a specific sequence of old leather-bound classics, Plato, Dante, Homer. I pressed them in reverse alphabetical order. With a soft hydraulic hiss that only I could hear over the ambient city noise, a section of the shelving, about 4 feet wide, retracted silently into the wall. Behind it wasn't a safe full of cash or secret documents. It was a sleek, matte black control panel, glowing faintly green. I sat down in the surprisingly comfortable executive chair that slid out from beneath the coffee table. I touched the screen, bringing up the portfolio interface. Let's see what Sterling Properties has been up to lately, I whispered, logging in with a biometric scan of my palm. The dashboard loaded, displaying a complex web of ownership percentages, liability reports, and asset valuations. I wasn't just Arthur Finch, struggling tenant. I was the majority shareholder, the silent partner, the entity that had secretly purchased the controlling interest in Sterling Properties 3 years ago during a leveraged buyout that Gerald Sterling had personally brokered, believing he was selling off a failing division to an anonymous holding trust. A trust that, of course, answered directly to me. I pulled up the Hawthorne Heights ledger. Gerald Sterling had been skimming profits for years, burying the evidence under layers of aggressive tenant management. This rent hike wasn't about renovation costs. It was about covering a massive discrepancy in his year-end projections, a desperate grab before the annual shareholder review, the review I chaired. I leaned back, the control panel reflecting in my glasses. The game was indeed afoot. Gerald wanted me out of 4B, Perhaps because he wanted to renovate my apartment, the one with the best view, for a future sale. Or maybe he just enjoyed the power trip. I drafted a short memo on the system, attaching the internal audit report showing his financial misconduct. I set the delivery time for 9 a.m. tomorrow, ensuring it would land directly on the inboxes of the board members and Gerald himself. But I wasn't done. Evicting me was inconvenient. Having him voluntarily leave the building he thought he owned? That was satisfying. I navigated to the lease termination protocols, my fingers flying over the virtual keyboard. I input the necessary parameters to override any standard management action regarding my tenancy, freezing any attempt to process the rent increase or issue further notices. Then, I activated the clause I'd quietly added to the executive bylaws last year. In the event of documented fiduciary malfeasance, the majority shareholder reserves the right to terminate all executive contracts immediately and assume temporary control of all managed assets. I hit execute. The system confirmed the command with a soft chime. Tomorrow morning, Gerald Sterling would find out that his landlord was not only his employee, but the very man he'd been trying to push out. I smiled, closing the interface and watching the bookshelf slide silently back into place, concealing the entire operation. Just as I was about to pour myself a celebratory glass of something aged, my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. The message was short, cryptic, and chilled me to the bone. I know about the panel, Arthur, and I want a cut. The celebratory sip of scotch died in my throat. I stared at the screen, the smooth glass suddenly feeling like ice against my fingertips. I know about the panel, Arthur, and I want a cut. This wasn't Gerald. Gerald was arrogant, predictable, and technologically unsophisticated. He'd use certified mail and probably hire a private investigator who would stake out my recycling bin for weeks. This message felt different. It was precise, delivered instantly, and carried an implication of surveillance that unnerved me more than any thinly veiled eviction threat ever could. Chairman Meow, sensing the shift in my equilibrium, let out a low, questioning growl from the shadow of the sofa. I checked the source of the message. No identifying number, just a temporary burner linked through 3 layers of VPN obfuscation. Amateur hour, perhaps, trying too hard to look professional, or someone skilled enough to erase their tracks instantly. Either way, they had seen something they shouldn't have. The panel. The secret compartment. How? I had installed that mechanism myself, deep within the structural confines of the apartment, ensuring the only way to trigger it was through the precise, sequential pressure points on the antique book spines. No one had been in this apartment in months, except for me and the occasional, highly supervised maintenance worker when a fuse blew, and even then I made sure the panel was fully concealed. I stood up, pacing the length of the living room, my mind racing through possibilities. Had one of the specialized technicians I used to install the system skimmed my name? Unlikely. They were bound by ironclad NDAs and knew nothing of the actual ownership structure. Then the thought hit me, sharp and cold. The renovation. 6 weeks ago, Gerald Sterling insisted on sending a crew to inspect the outdated wiring behind the bookshelves in my living room. I had reluctantly agreed, but I'd supervised every minute. Yet, if they had access to specialized equipment, perhaps ground-penetrating radar or advanced thermal imaging, no, even that wouldn't reveal the sequence. They'd just see a hollow space. I leaned back toward the wall, intending to reopen the panel, needing the tangible reassurance of the interface, when my landline, a rotary phone I kept purely for dramatic effect, rang. It was a jarring, old-fashioned sound in the modern quiet. I hesitated. My cell phone was the one I used for business, untraceable in this context. This landline was known only to a handful of long-term contacts, and apparently the person who just texted me. I lifted the receiver slowly. Hello? A voice, smooth as oiled silk but carrying an undeniable metallic edge, responded. It wasn't Gerald. It sounded educated, cultured, but utterly devoid of warmth. Mr. Finch, the voice purred. I apologize for the direct approach, but I find formal channels tend to be slow, much like your current management team. Who is this? I demanded, gripping the Bakelite phone so hard my knuckles whitened. Let's call me an interested party. I've been tracking the asset portfolio for some time now. Hawthorne Heights is a jewel, Arthur, a very underperforming jewel. And I must say, your method of handling the incumbent management is quite entertaining. Very theatrical, the whole secret lair setup. My stomach dropped. They hadn't just seen the panel, they had watched me open it. You were here, I stated flatly. I prefer to think of myself as an observer in the ecosystem, Arthur, and I saw you log in. I saw the termination order against Sterling. Impressive maneuver, truly. But while you were busy cleaning house, you missed a crucial detail in the fine print of the acquisition agreement from 3 years ago. The one you drafted, if I recall correctly, under the pseudonym F. Arbitrage. My blood ran cold. F. Arbitrage was the legal shell name used exclusively for the buyout. No one outside my internal counsel knew that name was connected to Arthur Finch. What detail? I managed, trying to sound collected, authoritative. The sublease clause, the voice continued, gaining speed, sounding almost giddy with discovery. You acquired the majority stake, Arthur, but you forgot that the original owners, the actual ones before Sterling even took over, had a small, untraceable clause buried regarding any building transferred via a leveraged buyout initiated by a hostile takeover of the controlling shares. I frantically pulled up the original acquisition documents on the hidden screen again, heart pounding against my ribs. The main contract was clean. I knew every comma. There is no such clause, I snapped. Oh, but there is, the voice chuckled. It's attached to the original municipal zoning permits, filed in 1978. It states that if the controlling shares of the property management entity change hands outside of standard corporate transfer protocols, such as a secret leveraged buyout, the owner of the original primary residential unit is granted right of first refusal for the entire complex, or alternatively, the right to assume operational control immediately, pending a successful demonstration of superior administrative capability. My mind spun. The original primary residential unit. That meant the very first apartment built on the grounds, the one with the oddly reinforced foundation, apartment 1A, the unit directly beneath me. I looked down at my feet, suddenly feeling the weight of the apartment above me and the cavernous space below. Who lives in 1A? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Currently, a very quiet, very well-informed gentleman named Mr. Silas Thorne. He's been waiting patiently for someone to trigger that clause for years, Arthur. He's even taken the liberty of setting up his own little command center down there. He just needed a suitable catalyst, and frankly, your little rent war with Sterling provided the perfect distraction. He asked me to deliver a message, since he's having a meeting with the building's structural engineer right now. The metallic voice paused, letting the implications settle like dust. He wants the keys to the management office by noon tomorrow, and he specifically mentioned that you should leave the key card for the subterranean parking garage on your doormat. He says he needs to move some equipment in. Oh, and Arthur, don't try to override the termination order against Sterling. Mr. Thorne already sent a counter notice 2 minutes before you did. His signature is on the bottom of the board-approved summary dismissal. The line clicked dead. I stood frozen in my living room. Gerald Sterling was gone, dismissed by a man I didn't know existed until 60 seconds ago. And now, Silas Thorne, the ghost in 1A, who had seemingly been living in my basement since before I bought the place, controlled Hawthorne Heights. And he knew I knew about the panel. I raced to the window, frantically pulling back the heavy drapes. The sun was just beginning to set, casting long shadows across the courtyard. I scanned the complex, looking for anything unusual, focusing on the discreet, nearly hidden entrance to the underground garage. As my eyes adjusted to the dim light filtering down to the lowest level, I saw it. Not equipment being moved, but a very faint, almost invisible plume of smoke. Not electrical smoke, but something chemical, curling up from a ventilation grate right near the foundation of the building. And then, a single, brilliant orange flash momentarily illuminated the grate, followed instantly by a deep, resonant thump from below, shaking the very floorboards beneath my feet. It wasn't just equipment he was moving in, he was setting something up. The thump from beneath the foundation was visceral, vibrating up through the soles of my slippers and settling deep in my chest. It wasn't the sound of heavy boxes being shifted. It sounded like controlled demolition. Silas Thorne wasn't just claiming administrative control. He was actively destabilizing the structure I currently occupied. I bolted back to the hidden panel. My hands, moments ago steady enough to execute a complex financial maneuver, were now shaking violently as I keyed in the override sequence for the Structural Integrity Monitoring System, a system only I, as the primary owner entity, had access to. The screen flickered to life, displaying a schematic of Hawthorne Heights. My own apartment, 4B, was highlighted in reassuring green. But directly beneath it, the footprint of 1A, Silas Thorne's domain, was flashing an angry, erratic red. The sensors monitoring the central load-bearing column supporting my entire stack of units were screaming warnings. Pressure deviations were spiking exponentially. Whatever chemical flash I'd seen was clearly a catalyst for a sustained reaction within the basement level. "What in God's name are you doing, Thorne?" I muttered, leaning close to the screen, trying to isolate the specific sensor readings. The text interface for the building diagnostics was suddenly interrupted. A new window, a full-screen takeover, slammed onto my display. It was a live feed, grainy and illuminated by stark emergency lighting. The camera was clearly positioned low to the ground, aimed upward. It was my own coffee table, my worn oak table, and sitting squarely in the center of the frame, next to Chairman Meow, who was now crouched low, his fur bristling, was the thick, off-white envelope containing Gerald Sterling's rent increase notice. Then, a hand, long-fingered, pale, and disturbingly steady, reached into the frame. It picked up the letter, folded it precisely, and then, with deliberate slowness, slid it into the gap where the bookshelf had been. The camera feed abruptly zoomed in on the keypad, focusing on the row of leather-bound books. "The problem with secret ownership, Arthur," Thorne's voice, calm, close, and now echoing slightly through my own speakers, intoned, "is that if someone else knows the lock combination, you don't just lose control of the property, you lose control of the narrative." I felt a wave of nausea. He hadn't just been watching me open the panel, he had somehow planted a remote access device inside the compartment itself, waiting for me to activate the system to plant his own feed. He had used my own secret against me. My focus snapped back to the structural readings. The load-bearing column was critically compromised. If he continued whatever exothermic reaction he was running down there, the entire central section of the complex would pancake. I had to get out. I had to confront him physically. I slammed the laptop shut, the hidden panel hissing closed, but I knew the moment I did, Thorne would have an unimpeded path to override the board's dismissal of Sterling. Or worse, he could use the instability to seize outright ownership, bypassing the shareholder review entirely. I grabbed my emergency go bag, a nondescript backpack containing cash, burner phones, and a heavy-duty lock-picking set, and paused at the front door. If I left, Thorne wins the building by default and potentially traps me outside while he finishes whatever he's doing below. If I stayed, I risked being crushed when that column gave way. Then a new, subtle vibration started. It wasn't a thump. It was a rapid, high-frequency buzzing, like an angry swarm of electric hornets trapped inside the walls. This wasn't related to the central column. This felt localized, directed. I looked around wildly. The buzzing seemed loudest near the electrical sockets. My cell phone rang. It was the burner number that had texted me earlier. I snatched it up, flipping the privacy screen open. "You shouldn't have gone to the panel, Arthur," the smooth voice said again, now sounding closer than ever, almost as if the speaker was standing just outside my door. That set off the other alarm, the one Gerald Sterling didn't know about. "What other alarm?" I demanded, my eyes darting towards the deadbolt. "The real failsafe. You see, Arthur, Sterling only managed the physical assets. The data, the true ownership records, the tax information, the offshore shell accounts that actually fund the operation, was controlled by a separate, highly sensitive digital vault. The buzzing intensified, and I watched in horror as the small LED indicator light on my Wi-Fi router began to flash erratically, turning from blue to solid, malevolent red. Silas Thorne may have the building footprint, but I have the keys to the accounting, the voice continued, laced with triumph. And if you don't open that door right now, Arthur, I'm going to wipe every traceable asset you've hidden behind F arbitrage, including the funds used to purchase Sterling properties, and frame you for the structural collapse you're about to experience. You'll be crushed under rubble, bankrupt, and framed for mass murder. Do you want to come out and negotiate, or should I just let the building breathe? The buzzing reached a fever pitch. The lights in my apartment flickered violently, and then, with a sharp, sickening pop, they died completely, plunging 4B into sudden, absolute darkness. In the silence that followed, punctuated only by Chairman Meow's distressed yowling, I heard a new sound, undeniably real, undeniably close. The faint, metallic click of the deadbolt on my front door being retracted from the outside. Someone was walking into my apartment. The click of the deadbolt was the sound of my sanctuary being breached. In the sudden, suffocating darkness, every other sense hypersensitized, I flattened myself against the wall beside the doorframe, bag clutched tight. The air in the apartment was thick with ozone from the fried electronics, mingling with the faint, lingering smell of Thorne's chemical reaction downstairs. I couldn't see anything, but I could hear. The intruder hadn't rushed in. They moved with the same measured, deliberate cadence I had heard in the voice on the phone. Slow, methodical steps across the oak floorboards, the floorboards I knew so intimately, now betraying my presence with every muffled creak. 2 people, I realized with a jolt of panic. The voice on the phone had claimed to be an interested party tracking the data, while Silas Thorne controlled the physical asset via the 1A loophole. I was caught between the silent engineer below and the digital executioner at my door. I slowly reached into my bag, finding the cold, reassuring weight of the lock-picking tension wrench. It wasn't much against a bullet, but it was something to focus on. "Arthur," the voice from the phone now echoed softly, seeming to emanate from the vicinity of the dead space where the hidden panel resided. "Don't make this difficult. The structural integrity of this building is about to be permanently altered. If you are inside when the primary support fails, Mr. Thorne will assume you died trying to hide assets, and I will assume you died trying to escape the collateral damage. Either way, the data is mine." My mind raced. If I tried to fight the intruder in the dark, I was at a massive disadvantage. But if I bolted, they would secure the apartment, and Thorne would have free rein below while the data thief cleaned out my digital life. I made a split-second decision based on the faintest memory of the layout of the room I'd lived in for 7 years. I spun around, took 2 rapid steps toward the center of the room, and then dropped hard onto the floor, rolling sharply to the right, aiming for the area near the dining nook where the light fixture had just blown. The intruder reacted instantly. A sound like tearing canvas sliced through the air where my head had been. A silenced weapon, judging by the muted report. A second shot followed immediately, closer this time, kicking up a faint puff of dust where my shoulder had just rested. "He's making a run for the rear fire escape," the intruder shouted, their voice now rougher, male, and clearly agitated by my sudden movement. "They think I'm running for the window." Good. I didn't move toward the window. Instead, I scrambled on my hands and knees toward the kitchen, a path that led in the opposite direction of the perceived escape route. Chairman Meow, bless his cowardly heart, had wisely vanished into the shadows beneath the refrigerator. I reached the granite countertop, feeling for the heavy cast-iron skillet I always kept handy, a purely psychological defense, until tonight. As my fingers closed around the handle, I heard the intruder fumbling with a small flashlight, the beam cutting a chaotic, jerky swath across the room. The beam swept past the coffee table, briefly illuminating the empty space where the panel had been. The intruder paused, confused. "Wait, the panel, it's closed." That gave me the fraction of a second I needed. I rose slightly, bringing the skillet up in a wide, low arc. I didn't aim for the head. I aimed for the hand holding the flashlight. Clang! The sound of metal on bone echoed explosively in the small space. The flashlight tumbled away, skittering across the floor, its beam momentarily trapped, pointing upward at the ceiling, before settling against the base of the wall, casting long, distorted shadows. I had bought myself maybe 3 seconds of tactical advantage. I didn't hesitate. Instead of swinging again, I used the momentary blindness to sprint toward the one place I knew was secure: the bathroom. I slammed the door shut, twisting the lock mechanism, a cheap interior latch but better than nothing, and bracing my back against the door. "Open this door, Finch," the injured man roared, his voice laced with pain and fury. I could hear him staggering, cursing. I didn't answer. I was breathing in short, panicked gasps. I was locked in a small room with a single window overlooking the communal courtyard, and outside, the structural integrity of the entire building was being actively undermined by a ghost named Silas Thorne. I pulled out my burner phone, the one I kept for emergencies, not the one the data thief was monitoring, and dialed the only number I trusted implicitly: my private security detail, who operated under the guise of Finch Architectural Restoration. The phone rang once, twice. I held my breath, listening to the heavy thudding against the bathroom door. "This is Echo Actual," a calm, professional voice answered immediately. "It's Arthur," I whispered urgently. "Hawthorne Heights. Immediate hard lockdown. 1A is compromised. I have unauthorized access in 4B, and the central column is failing. I need extraction and full structural analysis now. And Echo, I need you to verify something for me. Silas Thorne. Is he on the list?" The calm, professional voice paused for a beat too long. "Arthur, we're running diagnostics on your location ping now. Thorne. Silas Thorne is not on any operational manifest. However, his name is flagged in the deep archives of your acquisition file, cross-referenced with a holding company that ceased activity in 2008. It appears he was the original primary contractor for the foundation work, listed as a silent guarantor against any unforeseen long-term structural failures. If he's actively undermining the column..." The bathroom door shuddered violently under a heavy impact. The cheap latch groaned in protest. "Arthur, we are en route. ETA 7 minutes. Do not engage. Can you hold?" Before I could answer, the door buckled inward with a splintering crack. The flashlight beam swung wildly into the bathroom, catching my startled eyes. Standing in the doorway, clutching his now bloody hand, was not the smooth-voiced data thief, but a large, silent man wearing black tactical gear. The muscle Gerald Sterling had apparently hired months ago, now working for whoever paid more. But behind the muscle, leaning casually against the doorframe, his face obscured by shadow, was a different silhouette, a figure that moved with the relaxed confidence of someone who knew they had already won. And this new figure wasn't carrying a gun. He was holding my laptop, the one with the hidden panel, tucked neatly under his arm. 7 minutes is too long, Arthur, the calm voice of the data thief spoke from the shadowy figure, confirming he was the one directing the attack. "We've already downloaded everything, and as for holding, you don't have to. Mr. Thorne just sent a follow-up structural report to the board. The main support beam has completely fractured." The tiled floor beneath my feet gave way with a sharp, grinding sound, a sound far deeper and more final than the previous thumps. It wasn't just the column. It was my entire section of the building shifting laterally. I lost my footing as the floor tilted violently toward the gaping hole where the load-bearing structure had been, sending me sliding helplessly toward the darkness below, directly into the domain of Silas Thorne, while the data thief watched from the now unstable threshold. The world dissolved into a chaotic symphony of tearing metal, shattering porcelain, and the roar of collapsing brickwork. I didn't slide toward the edge of the building's collapse. I dropped straight down into the void where the central support used to be. The momentum of the collapsing floor flung me several feet, and I impacted something hard and resilient. Not the concrete of the basement, but a thick, yielding surface. I landed hard, my breath knocked clean out of me, the air thick with dust and the stench of freshly disturbed earth. Above me, the sound of my bathroom door, ripped from its hinges, signaled the tactical team's arrival, but it was too late for a clean extraction. Coughing violently, I pushed myself up, the cast iron skillet still clutched in my right hand. I was in a vast, subterranean space, a cavernous, makeshift workshop carved directly beneath the foundation. This wasn't just 1A. This was an entire clandestine operation hub, far larger than any single unit would allow. Powerful industrial lights suddenly flickered on, revealing intricate drilling equipment, large vats bubbling with ominous liquids, and, centered in the room, a massive, reinforced steel safe that looked designed to hold state secrets, not overdue utility bills. And there, leaning over a complex array of seismic monitoring equipment, was Silas Thorne. He was exactly as I pictured. Older, impeccably dressed in charcoal gray work overalls, hands moving with the practiced ease of a master craftsman over digital displays. He looked up, not startled, but mildly annoyed, as if I were an unexpected minor distraction. "Arthur Finch," Thorne said, his voice calm, almost paternal. "Right on schedule, or perhaps a little late. The structural failure was precisely timed for 8:58 a.m. You've caused quite a scene upstairs, I imagine." "You sabotaged the building," I managed, spitting out a mouthful of dust. "You tried to kill me." Thorne sighed, adjusting a thick pair of protective goggles resting on his forehead. "Collateral damage, Arthur, a necessary byproduct of accelerating market correction. Sterling was an amateur, clinging to outdated profit models. But you, Arthur, you're an enthusiast. You bought the shell, but you never fully understood the ecosystem you were investing in." He gestured around the cavern. "This isn't just Hawthorne Heights. This complex sits on a geological anomaly, a weak point in the bedrock. It's why the original zoning was so restrictive. Sterling was cutting corners on retrofitting the pilings. I've been monitoring this vulnerability for decades, waiting for the controlling entity to change hands so I could enact the necessary remediation." "Remediation?" I scoffed, brandishing the skillet uselessly. "You engineered a collapse." "I engineered a controlled evacuation," Thorne corrected, pointing toward the massive steel safe. "That safe contains the original, unalterable municipal deeds, the ones Gerald never found, the ones that predate the incorporation of Sterling Properties. They prove that the land rights revert to the party who can successfully demonstrate superior, proactive maintenance of the underlying geological structure. The collapse was just loud enough to clear the tenants out before the secondary phase begins." Suddenly, the main entrance to this subterranean chamber, a heavy steel blast door hidden behind a false wall in the original 1A storage unit, slid open with a hydraulic hiss. In stepped the tactical man from my bathroom, followed by the man with the voice, the data thief. He held my laptop, which was now emitting a steady green status light. "The data is secure, Silas," the data thief announced, nodding to Thorne. "The transfer of funds to the offshore account is initiated. Finch's entire digital footprint is now archived and ready for the board's review, under the assumption that he fled the scene." I finally understood the endgame. Thorne was physically seizing the land based on obscure maintenance rights, while the data thief, the outside contractor, was digitally erasing my financial existence and planting evidence of my culpability in the structural failure. They were partners. "You think I came down here unprepared, Thorne?" I took a deep breath, letting go of the skillet. I knew I couldn't fight both of them and the immediate threat of the secondary phase Thorne mentioned. "I think you're a good reader, Arthur," Thorne replied, unconcerned. "I read the entire acquisition file, Silas, every word, including the addendum you thought was filed under the 1978 zoning permits." I pointed at the large steel safe. "That safe requires a specific electronic sequence to open and a biometric scan to authorize the deed transfer." Thorne's composure wavered slightly. "Impossible. That sequence is locked to the original primary guarantor's DNA, long dead." "Not quite," I said, stepping forward, adrenaline overriding the pain from my fall. "When I bought Sterling Properties, I realized they were layers of ownership, obscured by archaic bureaucracy. I didn't just buy the company, Silas. I bought the entire holding structure that managed the original guarantor's estate 50 years ago. I raised my hand, palm open, toward the safe. The biometric scanner above the dial glowed momentarily, recognizing the unique pattern of my hand, the pattern that had been cross-referenced and layered through decades of proxy acquisitions. You needed my digital trail wiped clean to initiate the land transfer, I continued, my voice regaining its sharp, controlled edge. But you didn't realize that the person who controls the digital trail also controls the failsafe on the physical assets. I pressed my palm firmly against the scanner. A loud, electronic clunk echoed through the bunker. The dial began to spin wildly, aligning the tumblers. "What are you doing?" the data thief shouted, finally realizing the magnitude of his error. "I'm accepting your challenge," I said, taking a step toward Thorn. "You wanted remediation? You're about to get it." The safe clicked open with a heavy thud, revealing not deeds, but a small, high-tech device humming ominously inside. It was a localized ground-penetrating electromagnetic pulse generator, the secondary phase Thorn had mentioned. "That device will instantly stabilize the bedrock fissures and neutralize the instability you caused," I explained, my eyes locked on Thorn. "But the activation sequence is tied to a simultaneous broadcast to the entire board of directors, detailing your sabotage and the data thief's attempt to frame me." I picked up the device. "You wanted control of the land? You can have the responsibility. Activate that EMP and you inherit all the repair costs, legally certified under your name with the evidence of your conspiracy already uploaded." Thorn lunged, a sudden burst of desperate, animalistic energy replacing his calm demeanor. "Give me that." But the data thief was faster. He looked from Thorn to the open safe and then back to the glowing laptop in his hands, calculating the risk of being associated with a man about to be exposed for treasonous structural sabotage versus seizing control of Arthur Finch's massive digital empire. The data thief made his move. He slammed his heavy laptop down onto Thorn's seismic monitoring station, triggering an audible alarm that sounded exactly like the emergency evacuation signal for the entire building. "Silas, the board is watching the live feed," the thief yelled, pointing frantically at his own compromised screen. "You're compromised. I'm initiating my emergency severance clause." As the thief dove for a hidden exit on the far side of the bunker, Silas Thorn stared at me, realization dawning in his eyes. He hadn't just been betrayed by the renter. He'd been betrayed by his own partner, who chose self-preservation and digital wealth over shared physical dominion. Thorn looked from the detonator in my hand to the fleeing data thief, then back to me. He gave a slow, defeated nod, a flicker of respect passing over his face. "Clever, Finch. You played us both against the middle." He took a step back, hands raised in surrender, just as the security team, my security team, breached the outer blast door, their tactical lights blinding. "Echo Actual," I called out over the chaos, holding the EMP device aloft. "Do not engage Mr. Thorn. Secure the perimeter. And send an immediate structural stabilization order to the building engineers. Tell them to follow the schematic displayed on the screen of the laptop, currently being carried out the east tunnel by a fleeing individual in dark clothing." As the tactical team moved to secure Thorn and the evidence in the safe, I felt a final, profound shift beneath my feet. Not a collapse, but a settling, solidifying sound as the core structure found its new equilibrium, held stable by the promise of the device in my hand. I looked up at the gaping hole where my bathroom used to be, dust settling slowly onto my ruined life. The rent war was over. I had lost my apartment, but I had exposed 2 empires built on deceit, and I retained the true ownership of everything that mattered. As the tactical team escorted a defeated Silas Thorn away, I turned back to the empty space where the data thief had fled. I pulled the burner phone out again, dialing the one number I hadn't used yet, the main corporate line for my own holding company. "It's Arthur," I said into the receiver, my voice tired but resolute. "Initiate Phase 2. We are purchasing the defunct holding company of Silas Thorn, effective immediately. And then I want a full report on every known associate of the individual who just stole a laptop from a collapsing building. I want him found, and I want that laptop back. Because if there's one thing I learned today, it's that an unsecured data trail is the one thing you can never, ever afford to leave behind.